The Institute of World Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee presents International Focus, a weekly discussion of the people and events behind today's global headlines. Support provided by Milwaukee Public Television and the UWM Center for International Education. Now here's your host, Doug Savage.
Welcome to International Focus. According to UNESCO figures, in at least 35 countries around the world, less than 25% of adolescents complete lower secondary school. Yet in many other nations, the secondary school graduation rate tops 95%. This disparity in educational attainment exists within nations as well. In the U.S., for example, high school graduation rates for African American students are approximately 15% lower than for white students. To help us understand the drivers of educational inequality and the impact it has here and abroad, we're joined today by Rebecca Winthrop, director of the Brookings Institution's Center for Universal Education, where she specializes in education in the developing world. Her research pays special attention to the skills students need to succeed in life and strategies to improve learning for the most marginalized children and youth, including girls and children affected by extreme violence. Rebecca Winthrop, welcome to International Focus.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I wonder if you could give us some sense of the scope of the problem. I mean, the Millennium Development Goals, which were to have been accomplished last year, hope to address the 60 million kids who aren't in school ever. So how did we do?
Well, the Millennium Development Goals, which were the UN set from 2000 to 2015, so for 15 years, we did pretty well, actually, on the Millennium Development Goals. We didn't meet them in education. The goal really was twofold. Girls and boys in equal numbers enter and complete primary school, and then you have girls and boys in equal numbers in secondary school. And there actually was a huge momentum, both by governments and the international community and donors, to really build schools, make them free, make them compulsory largely in the developing world, and a lot of kids started going to primary school. And now 9 out of 10 kids around the world are in primary school. So that's the good news part.
So that 1 out of 10 who's not, is that part of that 60 million we haven't gotten to yet?
That's right. That's right. And the other half of the equation is that, of course, once you just show up and go to school, it doesn't mean you'll stay and you'll finish, and it doesn't mean it's a very good school where you'll learn the skills you need to learn. So that's the challenge now for the world, and the UN set another set of goals, that's what they like to do, called the Sustainable Development Goals, which are 2015 to 2030, and the Sustainable Development Goals are really about writ large across all the sectors, including education, the second half. So they're goals that in theory apply to the whole world, not just the developing countries, and they're building off the progress made in the Millennium Development Goals to try to finish the job, which in education means get kids, the rest of the kids who aren't in school, the 60 million kids who aren't in school, into school, and make sure that the kids who are in school are actually having a quality education so that they're learning. There's a big problem. We have 250 million kids around the world, 130 million of them who are in school who spend at least 4 years in school, and after 4 years can basically not read a word or even do very simple math. So in many ways, that's just a totally wasted opportunity.
Well, it's not just about seat time, and that's certainly a phenomenon we see in this country as well, right? I mean, kids can social promotion, and you can pass through and really not have it impact you a great deal. Well, you know, you've written elsewhere that the developing world in terms of education is about 100 years behind. And what do you mean by that?
Yeah, this is a research project that we've been working on, really trying to get sort of at the big picture of global education. And one of the startling findings is that education in the developing world, we call the 100-year gap, is about 100 years behind, as you say. And if in a couple of different ways, if you think about it in the following way. One is that at the turn of the century here in the United States, so in the 1900s, the thing that really set kids apart was the third of the kids who were probably going to make it through high school. Those were going to be the kids who are going to be the future leaders, who are going to grow the economy, who are going to grow the country. And at the moment today in sub-Saharan Africa, there's a third of kids who make it through high school. So that's an access piece. So in some ways, historically, it's about 100 years behind. And then another way to look at it is what kids are learning. So the average student in a developing world context or a developing world country fares in terms of reading and math and basic academic competencies, fares basically the same as the worst 5% of students in rich countries like the US or Europe. And that's not projected to change. So that's a learning gap about what kids are actually learning once they're in school. And from the data that we have, it's going to take at least 100 years for those kids to catch up to the learning levels of the kids in rich countries today. That doesn't even count for the fact that kids in 100 years in the US or Europe or other rich nations are probably going to be far more advanced.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the drivers of this gap, and we'll just hit them one by one, and I'll just throw one out there, and if you could talk a little bit. What about wealth?
Yeah. So the probably, you might be going one by one. I might be jumping ahead in your line, but I'm just going to go for it, and you can tell me if this is what you were thinking. Probably the biggest differential between how kids are faring is wealth in developing countries. The second biggest differential is, are they living in a city or are they living in a rural area? So their geography. And the third biggest differential is if they're a girl or if they're a boy. So kids from the top 25% socioeconomically of society, so the wealthiest 25% of society or 20% of society, are doing pretty well, even in developing countries. And children of the very wealthy have access to wonderful private schools and go internationally for school, just like many kids of wealthy families here in the US. So we don't actually have to worry too much about them. The big problem is that the poorest 20 to 50% of kids really have just a vastly different life from the wealthy kids. So this is something that we see here in the US too. I know Milwaukee is struggling with an achievement gap between rich and poor kids and possibly black and white kids. You can tell me more about that. Certainly that's the case in Washington, D.C., where my kids are in school. And it's the same in developing countries. I have a great example from Nigeria to give you if you're interested. Please. So, Doug, I know you're asking me questions, but I'm going to ask you a question. What do you think is the average number of years a kid is supposed to be in, goes to school in Nigeria? Average number. Just random guess. Actually goes or is supposed to go? No, sorry, goes to school. Actually goes. 4 years. It's actually higher than that, but you're close. 6 years. What do you think the average number of years a kid from the wealthiest quintile of society goes to school? Girls and boys, average number of years. 10. Right on. 10 years. Okay, what do you think about a kid from the poorest? How long do you think they actually end up going to school from the poorest strata of society in Nigeria? Possibly 0, I would think. Yeah, it's 2 years. Yeah. And if you're a girl and you live in a Hausa-speaking community, Hausa are an ethnic linguistic minority in Nigeria, it's 3 months. Average 3 months. So that's, and you live in a rural area. So that's the big difference between 10 years and 3 months. Well, and the gender issue is a subject in and of itself, and I'd like to get into that in greater detail in just a bit. But what about a couple of the other dynamics? You mentioned urban versus rural. What about just minority status within a society? Yeah, so we often in the global education community talk about ethnic linguistic minorities. So one of the things that really holds kids back is mother tongue instruction, or lack thereof. This means they grow up in a house and a community and perhaps a region that speaks a certain language, and that is not the language that is taught in school, and that when they show up at 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, because oftentimes kids will enter a little late, fully verbal and fluent in their native tongue, and they're supposed to learn to read and write and do everything else in a totally foreign language, they ultimately fail for obvious reasons. And it's a very challenging situation, because oftentimes in developing countries there are many, many, many languages that are spoken. So it's a very difficult situation that policymakers face.
And then finally, what about just conflict?
Yes.
As a driver of inequality in education.
That is a huge one. You hit the nail on the head. About a third of all the kids who are out of school in the world today are out of school because of humanitarian crises. So that's a crisis by war and civil war or violence. People think about Syria a lot in the news today, but there's also many, many others. Conflicts and violence around the world, northern Nigeria, we talked about, Congo, et cetera, et cetera. Or there's a natural disaster, a massive earthquake just happened in Nepal not too long ago that really levels the education system, decimates communities. Or there's a health epidemic. These are all different types of humanitarian crises. We've heard about the Ebola crisis. Again, that decimated not only people and their lives, but schools were closed for a very long time and are just now beginning to reopen.
Well, and the timing is critical, isn't it? I mean, if it's the very formative part of your education and you lose 2 years, that's a big deal.
Yeah, although there are in places where kids really get their education disrupted, there are strategies that people have worked out to try to catch them up and make sure that they can, once life settles down, can keep going. And part of the strategy is, even if you're in a refugee setting or you're actually in a humanitarian crisis where there is some basic semblance of safety, is to try to keep studying and keep learning, even while the crisis is happening. It sounds complicated, but you don't do it like you would normally do. You don't build a school in the middle of a crisis, but you can find a teacher who's also been displaced, who might have a book or two and get together for a couple hours a day and teach kids whatever it is they need to be taught. People call that education in emergencies, and it's actually a growing science to how it's done. And believe it or not, it actually does work. It can be done. So there's that, as well as trying to do, once different crises are over, trying to do accelerated learning, crunching a couple years of school down into one, doing it around the summer, doing intensive different types of interventions to catch kids up and keep them going.
Well, you've written more extensively on the gender component to all of this, and I'd like to go into that in a bit more detail. But first, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back.
Sounds good.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back. We're talking about educational disparities with Rebecca Winthrop. Well, you've written a book here. Maybe I can show this. What Works in Girls' Education. And so, obviously there's a huge gender component to this kind of disparity. And what are some of the things specific to girls that present challenges? So
there's a couple of reasons why it's important to focus on girls. One is you get higher returns for society when you educate a girl. They help their kids more, they feed back into the community more, families are healthier, the wages they make are invested back into their communities more so than with men and boys. And girls are at a disadvantage in many countries. Not necessarily because their parents love them less, but because they have cultural norms and social norms, rather I should say, that leave them less options for pursuing education outside their home. So when it's difficult to pursue education, it makes just more economic sense often for poor families to send their boys to get educated.
Well, and in places, as it often is in developing countries where population is an issue, the more education a girl gets, typically the fewer children she's going to have. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. In the book, one of the things we did is review sort of all the evidence around girls' education for the last several decades, and really found that it was quite amazing, actually. We came up with our own top 10 list, so to speak, of all the different ways in which you get really high returns on your investment when you educate a girl. And one of them is that it's very, very striking and clear that the more a girl is educated, particularly if she makes it to secondary school, she just has less number of children, smaller, more sustainable families. And for those folks out there in the climate change arena, there was globally a big convention and summit in Paris around climate change, lots of money going into that. A big difference on the impact of climate change on our world will be the number of people on the planet.
Well, and at a societal level, what economic impact is sort of sidelining some portion of our kids? And is there any studies that can quantify what that means to bring everybody in?
Yeah. There are studies, and there's a number that we cite there in the book that really show sort of the returns to investing the money you need to invest to get everybody educated. Because of course we want girls to get educated, but we also want boys, so it's not girls or boys. So again, everybody educated, the money you need to invest far outweighs the returns you'll get in terms of not only wages and jobs to the girls and boys themselves, and the great impacts that has on the community, and in terms of improved health and less expense for healthcare, et cetera, but also growth, economic growth. And there's a number of studies that make different calculations about how that just benefits everybody. Particularly, we found in this book, particularly when you get girls through secondary school. Before the evidence was really thinking it was more around primary with the bang for the buck, but it's really heavily all the way through secondary.
But how does that align with sort of our traditional development model? I mean, one of the first things the IMF will do with the sort of structural adjustments in a poor country is say, government spending has to be cut, subsidies for various things, including education, in some cases have to be. So is the development model supportive of that?
Well, if it's not, they should adjust it. There are hot debates in policy terms about what the right policy levers are to help a country grow and develop. A rich nation become a wealthier nation, a healthy nation, a sick nation become a healthy nation. I'm talking about health outcomes and life outcomes for people in different parts of the world. But one thing I think that the economists largely agree on is the fact that if you have public dollars, you really should drive money into providing education for everybody, at least at a primary level and probably a secondary level. I think they would say, look, because there's so many external benefits in society, and education really is a public good. It's not just, which is true, that if I get educated, I benefit. That's partly true, but it's also that my kids will be healthier, I'll be a better citizen, the community, my family will be healthier. There's a whole bunch of public good ramifications. So people, by and large, support that idea of education as a public good. There's a lot of debate on how to deliver it. That's a separate topic.
Well, we've talked a little bit about the economic side of it, but there's a political and a sort of a security aspect of this as well. Gordon Brown, the former PM of the UK, is now special UN Special Envoy for Global Education. He's talked a lot about the ability of kids who are denied this opportunity to realize that they're being denied this opportunity, because in a network world, people aren't isolated the way they once were, and people rightly ask, well, why don't I get those chances? And if you have large numbers of kids around the world who feel that they've been marginalized, it has very serious ramifications going forward. I mean, is there a lot of research on that? I mean,
There is a body of research. I wouldn't say a ton, but there are certainly really great research institutes working on this topic. And he's totally right, Gordon Brown, that in research terms, what he was talking about is what people have called, researchers have called, the pacifying effect of education, meaning that if kids are out of school, particularly in ways where groups are marginalized from others, it causes social friction, it causes distrust, it causes discontent, it leaves other options for sort of social action, which could be violent, could also not, much more open. However, if you have an education system that is inclusive, that brings everybody in, even if not perfect, and helps kids stay through, particularly all, enter in primary and stay through secondary, it really reduces the risk of violent conflict in that country. There's really clear evidence on that front.
And it sounds like it has great parallels in our own situation, and particularly in our own urban areas.
Yeah, I mean, the struggles that the United States faces, particularly in urban areas, between achievement gaps between groups of a population. I'm thinking particularly of Black and minority youth and white youth. I don't know every state very well, but in my own town of Washington, D.C., where I'm living now, there's a massive achievement gap between Black kids and white kids. I think it's almost 70%, which is terrible and totally unjust, and of course gives kids the sense that they're not being looked out for, and they might have to seek alternative paths for furthering their own chances in life.
Well, one of the things that education does is foster this sense of identity, of belonging, of buy-in to society. Talk a little bit about the sort of social cohesion aspect of education.
Yeah, I did some research a long time ago on actually how kids, refugee kids, and kids affected by armed conflict see education, and how did it affect their psychosocial well-being. And one of the most interesting things is that they saw it as their ticket to a better life, and that there was a group of people out there in their own community, but more in the world, that was educated. And if they could get into that group of people, they would have a better chance in life. And their parents felt that too. And so social cohesion can be at different levels. So that's one way of thinking about it. Of course, education can also be delivered very poorly and can reinforce stereotypes and stigma. And if you have a terrible curriculum, or if you have bring that worldview into the classroom, it can reinforce that. And we've seen that in many places and in different times in history, even within our own country. So you have to be really focused on making sure that the content and the messages of what kids are learning and how kids are being brought into a classroom or into a school to make sure they're on equal footing is delivered in order to get that social cohesion.
So you have a foot in both a domestic and an international education camp. What have you seen abroad that you think could be applicable to addressing some of the challenges here in this country?
Yeah, one of the interesting things, we were talking a little bit before, that I'm undertaking right now is a project on looking at new models of education, in part because the Sustainable Development Goals we talked about earlier really call for, all kids to have a good quality education, not just reading and writing, but learning some of these 21st century skills that are needed in today's world. And we don't have great models to quickly do that in many parts of the world. So I've been scanning the globe, have a big database with my team, for new models of education. And I think, again, if you do research, you want to analyze it first before you say. But early on, some of the things that I've been seeing is that there probably are useful ideas that come from the developing world who could be, provide insight here in the U.S. One of them is that I've been seeing in multiple cases is education programs and initiatives, whether by the government or others, as really trying to elevate the role of the teacher and help take away a lot of the other stuff that a teacher will do each day, which is life coach, mentor, child psychologist, friend, classroom manager, and give it to other people. And so there's some interesting models from Brazil to India to various other places that are sort of really elevating the role of the teacher and bringing in others to do a range of other jobs that currently have all been done by one person.
Well, that's fascinating stuff. We'll have to leave it at that, unfortunately. Rebecca Winthrop, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Our viewers, we'll see you next time on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website.